We're honored to have with us today at the Jerusalem Post Conference U.S. Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman. Ambassador, it's great to have you here.
Yaakov, thank you. It's great to be with you.
So you landed back in Israel just before Rosh Hashanah, the new year. You came from the historic signing of the Abraham Accords, of the peace treaties between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain. I would say that's quite the transition.
It was an incredible transition because I went from the Abraham Accords, rushed back for Rosh Hashanah. Unfortunately, I was in Bidud immediately, so I was alone with my thoughts and a machzor. And I read the Torah reading, and I see, what are we reading about? We're reading about the rivalry between Isaac and Ishmael, and how Abraham loved them both and was troubled by the rivalry. And of course, we know that upon Abraham's demise, the two reconciled. So here I'm going from the two nations, the Jewish nation and the Arab nation, reconciling in Washington, to a Torah portion which seems to be restating exactly the events that took place, albeit some 3,500 years earlier.
Interesting. Some people say here, and this is some criticism that we're hearing in Israel, that it's not a peace treaty, it's a normalization treaty. What do you make of that?
This has always been referred to as the Arab-Israeli conflict. You know, there are 22 nations in the Arab League, and they have always, as a bloc, been opposed to Israel, refused to recognize Israel's right to exist. So when I see two members of the Arab League, two important members, that now normalize with Israel and exchange ambassadors and establish reciprocal embassies, to me that's a peace treaty.
That's a peace treaty.
Yep.
And it's a potentially warm peace, right? Because this is something that you're already seeing in the people-to-people level.
I'm so gratified by what I'm seeing. I'm seeing, kosher restaurants being opened up at the airports. The Chabad got a license to operate, publicly. The Ministry of Tourism is directing the hotels to make kosher food available. There have been so many people-to-people exchanges already, just in a couple of weeks, and the feelings are so warm and open that it's just an incredibly gratifying feeling.
And I have a feeling that the kosher food on their line probably might be a little better than some of the kosher food we're used to. But
yeah, I couldn't get kosher food in Washington, so to get it in Abu Dhabi is really not so bad.
But what's next? We're hearing a lot about different countries: Sudan, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, Oman. Can you give us any indication? The president spoke about 5 to 6 countries that might be in line now ahead of another deal with Israel.
I think the answer is yes. I don't know what the order will be or how long it'll take, but I think the agreement with the Emirates was an icebreaker. We refer to it as an icebreaker. We are having discussions with all those countries. They're all at different stages. Each country has its own needs and issues, but I have no doubt, I've said this before, when the dust settles, I believe the Arab-Israeli conflict will be over.
The entire conflict?
It's almost like herd immunity. Once you get to a certain level of immunity, it doesn't have to be 100%. It could be 30% or 40%, and it just overwhelms the problem. And I think we'll get to a point, if you will, by analogy, we're talking about diseases all day long, of almost herd immunity within the Arab world. There'll be enough nations that break through that it'll just be unstoppable.
But what's interesting is that people were very doubtful that you and the rest of the team would succeed in doing anything here. You came with no Middle East experience. You're a lawyer that the president talks about often as being the best lawyer in New York, right? One of the highest paid lawyers. He just said that at a rally the other day in North Carolina. But you managed to flip the paradigm. You and the team, Jared Kushner, Avi Berkowitz, all these. But how did that happen in flipping that paradigm?
Look, I think there's a broader point here, which is the importance of political appointees in government, because if all you do is regurgitate the existing, conventional wisdom, you are literally living out Einstein's definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Right.
So in our world, before we got into government, our world was always to question, does this make sense? Should we do it a different way? And I think from very early on, we had a real strong sense that the Gulf was ready for change, and that while the Palestinians were important as an issue to the region, they weren't the only issue. They certainly weren't a blocking issue. And I think once our peace plan came out, I think we demonstrated, because both the Prime Minister and the alternative Prime Minister, they were both candidates at the time, but because they both supported this as the best, most realistic plan to resolve the Palestinian conflict. I think these nations saw that Israel was serious about making peace. Not at any price, not on any terms, but they were serious about making peace. And I think at that point, they looked to the Palestinians who, ran to the UN and tried to rip up, the document publicly. They said, you know what, kind of enough. We all have our own issues. We all have our own people that we have to protect and advance. And you just don't deserve anymore a veto on the progress of the region.
I want to ask you about annexation or application of Israeli sovereignty. That was something that came out of the Peace to Prosperity plan that was unveiled in January at the White House. It was something that the Prime Minister said he's going to do, Prime Minister Netanyahu, he's going to do right away.
Right.
A wrench got thrown in the wheels of that, it seemed immediately, but he kept on saying by July would happen, by July it didn't happen. The UAE deal came out and it seemed like that's been put aside. Now, depending who you ask, you get a different answer. According to the Israelis, it's been suspended. According to the Emiratis, it's been taken off the table. What do the Americans have to say?
I think actually everybody's saying the same thing because, if you look at the statement, that the joint statement of the three nations, we use the word suspended. And suspended is, by definition, temporary. That's what the word means in the dictionary. But look, on the issue of sovereignty, which is a word I prefer to annexation. Annexation is more of, your only rights to the territory are by reason of a military conquest. I think Israel's rights to the territory go far beyond.
It fits better in a headline in a newspaper.
It does. It's a shorthand word, but it's not really the right word. But I think the point is this: look at our administration. We have Secretary Pompeo determining, reversing 50 years of flawed legal reasoning and determining that Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria are not illegal. We have, I don't know how many times I've said from early on that we would never expect Israel to evacuate any of its communities in Judea and Samaria. We saw the template from the Gaza Strip. None of us, I think, liked what we saw there. We put out a map which shows every single Jewish community in Judea and Samaria is staying there. So, the sovereignty movement, and I don't want to minimize that movement, but the sovereignty movement got a huge shot in the arm from the Trump administration. These conversations weren't even being had in polite company until we came along. So what happened? You said a wrench got thrown into it. I look at it a little bit differently. What really happened was we got a massive opportunity. Okay, we had the massive opportunity to make peace between Israel, the Emirates, Bahrain, and I'm thinking 5 to 10 more countries. And we came to the conclusion that the sovereignty action created too much friction in the current sense to move forward with that initiative. And so we prioritized. We spoke with obviously the Israeli government. We collectively prioritized peace, which happens once in a generation, if at all, over sovereignty. And one of the reasons is that today there's a flag flying over Hebron, Beit El, Ma'ale Adumim, Shiloh, Gush Etzion. They're all flying there right now, Israeli flags. Under our plan, they'll be flying there forever. So it's not like we had to rush to change something. The flags were already there. But peace, peace is something that is really a rarity.
But can you give us a date when the Prime Minister can maybe bring a resolution to the cabinet?
I can't now because I think we want to spend all of our time focusing on advancing these peace agreements with many more countries. And it's not limited to the Gulf. We have an overall notion of the Abraham Accords, that what the parties signed in Washington, they signed treaties with each other, and then everybody signed the Abraham Accords. They're principles of coexistence within the region, of religious tolerance, of religious freedom. And lots of countries can sign that, even if they have no conflict with Israel or no immediate issues with Israel. They can sign it too. And by the way, we also are on a path now to see a lot more countries move their embassies to Jerusalem. So we're gonna take this as far as it goes, and if it takes 1 year or 2 years or whatever, we're not going to allow ourselves to be distracted from this endeavor because we think it's important. And by the way, I'm very gratified to see that in the polling, I think 80% of Israelis, whether they approve of sovereignty or not, 80% of Israelis approve of this issue being handled as the first order of business.
Of course. I want to ask you quickly about the F-35s.
Sure.
Those were put on the table. The president even spoke about it, selling them to the UAE. Does this not undermine Israel's QME, qualitative military edge, that America is committed to retaining?
No, not at all, for several reasons. First of all, QME is a matter of law, not a matter of policy. So it's been U.S. law since 2008. It's been U.S. policy for longer than that. The Emirates have been trying to get F-35s for 6 or 7 years. The delivery time is probably another 6 or 7 years from now if they got it. There are so many different ways to skin this cat. And what I would say is this. Israel has dealt with the QME behind the scenes, professionally, outside of the politics, successfully for more than a decade. It's going to continue to work that way. This should not be a political issue. It's not in Israel's interest to discuss, what they're afraid of or what they want or what they should get. The professionals are engaged right now. Let them engage. Let them continue to engage, and we'll get to the right outcome because we want to get to the right outcome because President Trump is committed to Israel's security, and the law requires it as well.
But if Israelis come and say, the commander of the Air Force comes to the president or comes to you and says, Mr. Ambassador, Mr. President, this is a threat to us, America will ensure that Israel gets something or something will happen there that will make sure that Israel's still safe?
It's not a conversation for the political echelons. It's a conversation for the military experts. Okay, and I've met with them on the American side. They want to get to the right outcome. They're well aware of their legal responsibilities, and they want to support Israel. And they will get to the right outcome. But the decision is not political; it's technical. It's for engineers. It's for pilots. It's for people that really understand what this equipment can do, and that's where the discussion should reside.
So, come November 4th, if President Trump wins re-election, you stay on as ambassador?
Well, I'm committed to serving my country and the president in any way that he sees fit. So we'll have that discussion. I look forward to that discussion. Serving the United States as the ambassador to Israel has been the greatest honor of my life by, other than, weddings and births of children and grandchildren and things like that, which come first. This has been the greatest thing that's ever happened to me, and I will do everything I can to continue to serve my country.
Ambassador David Friedman, thanks for being at the Jerusalem Post Conference.
Thanks. I'm glad we could finally do this.
Yes.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.